Now in this video, I'm going to give you 10 names plus a bonus name for this. Now this here is called a fuller. But what are the other names of this groove you find on most swords? Well, let's explore this subject in a little bit more detail. Now, as you can see, I am holding what you would describe as a Norse or Viking sword, but you can also describe it as an Anglo-Saxon sword as well, because of the pommel shape, the typical bread style pommel. And this is a very nice sword. This is the first sword I ever owned. It cost me £100 back in 1999. And yes, it is a Paul Binns. So you also know it's an excellent sword and it's a quality made sword. That is so important when you buy a blade and you buy a sword. And it is also blunt. It is rounded off at the edge and rounded off at the tip, so I can use it in combat. And I've used this sword a hell of a lot in Viking reenactments on the battlefield. It has been a well-trusted weapon for me to use, and I have killed many a Saxon and many a Norman with this sword. Pretend, of course. But this here, as we know, is called the fuller. Now the fuller is there for a reason, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But what are the other names it goes by? Now in this video, I'm going to give you 10 names plus a bonus name for this groove on this sword. And it's a fascinating bit of history. And at the end, we will also talk about why it is there and why it is important that a sword has a fuller or a groove. So of course the first name is fuller, and it's what I often use as probably my most favourite one to use because I think it's the most technical name there is. And again, you can see it as it glints in the sun. It is hollowed out section. It's a concave grinding, and it's been put there during the manufacturing of this sword and of the blade. So number one is fuller. Number two is blood channel. Again, it is associated with blood. And the reason that is because we have this myth in the whole world of swords that when you stab somebody with a sword, you have a groove in the blade so you can put it out easier. That is just a myth. It's not true. It doesn't make it any easier to put it out of a body. Not that as Viking reenactors we actually stab people. We don't. We have these swords for display and for combat display only. And yes, you may have a sharp sword, a part of your display items you may show to the public, but most are blunt for a reason. Now another name we can have is a blood groove or groove blood, but a blood groove to me sounds better. It is the same as the second one fundamentally. It is describing the fact that within the myth it's easy to put it out of a body, so a blood groove is the third name for this groove. Another name which I don't often use is a blood ditch. I guess you could say it is a ditch. You think about going down a country lane, lanes are hollow, they're ditches, and ditches around ancient sites and barrows, so you could also call it a blood ditch. Not the one I prefer to use, but yet again, it is quite an interesting description of the blood groove or the fuller. Now another name which can also be associated with this is a central ridge. But when it comes to a central ridge, it is the opposite of a fuller. It is describing the fuller being not concave but concave. So it doesn't go hollow in the blade and it curves over. We often see this with Norman blades and the blades of the later periods. Now another name we could use for the fuller is a blade groove. It is describing the blade and the groove, so a blade groove is another description. And yet again, I find that to be very, very fascinating. It's talking about the element of blood to make it easier when you're in a battle. But let's face it, if you're stabbing away in the shield wall and you manage to get your blade through an Anglo-Saxon, you want your sword to come out easy and not be a struggle. And I'd love to test this, get a dead pig or something and see whether it is easier with a sword with no fuller and a sword with a fuller, and then also using one with a central ridge, which I do have a couple copies and samples off for the later period. So yes, blade groove. Now another name for a fuller is the fee groove, but that again refers to the later blades which don't have the fuller in the same sense of it being concave. It is the opposite of that. It is a V section. Another term we can use is a swedge, but it's not one I've really heard of too much in my time of being a reenactor, so not overly familiar with the word swedge. I know what a swedge is and what it represents, but again, it is another word, another name for a fuller. Whether it refers to the opposite of a fuller and having a fee section rather than having a groove, I don't know, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And if you do have any thoughts, leave it in a comment, and don't forget, folks, to go and subscribe. Now, another name we could also use is a spine groove, because it's representing the spine or the main body of the blade itself. A spine groove. This being the spine, the body, and of course that being the groove. Again, a fascinating idea. Now, another name we can also use is a flute. Again, I'm not overly familiar with the word flute when it comes to representing a fuller or a groove on a sword. Does it represent a concave fuller, or does it represent the fee section, the opposite of a groove? I'd love to know. And one of my favourite ones, which a subscriber mentioned, was a blood fuller, or a fuller blood. Again, it describes what it is. It is a groove, and it's within the myth that when you stab somebody, it is easy to get your sword and blade out. But let's face it, if you're in a battle and your sword gets stuck into an Anglo-Norman and you can't get your sword out, you're going to have to use an axe or a spear, or worse, use your sea axe. So yes, another fascinating and interesting term. But why do we have fullers, and why do we have a groove on the sword? Well, it is there and has been put in during the process of making the blade. So after many hours of smelting and making iron, if you're not buying it in ready in an ingot, you end up with a sword shape. But then you have a concave bit of a hammer and an anvil. You have a device which you can go along with the blade, and with a hammer you knock it in and you put this groove into the blade itself. And what happens, it pushes the blade out in the width, and it also adds more strength to the body. And I'm sure there's other videos on this very subject which are better than this one's, but this video is mainly about the different names. But it's an important part of the process when it comes to the sword manufacturing. If you don't have a blood groove or a fuller in your sword and it's just a straight edge, it's not going to be as strong. So it's there designed for strength, and it's also designed because it tapers off. As you can see on this groove, it gets narrower at this end and wider at this end, so it's also there to add that strength and to push the blade out during the process of smithing the sword. And it is normally done by 2 to 3 people, because it's a very difficult job to do on your own, because you need somebody holding the tool. And at some point in the future we'll demonstrate this, because I do have the tools and I do have a blacksmith forge I could demonstrate and make a sword on it in the future, because I think that'll be quite fascinating. But for the meantime, I think it's quite cool that we have all these names, and that was altogether 12 different names for the groove or the fuller. But do you know any more? But do you guys know any more names for this part of the sword? I'd love to know. Please leave it in a comment. And if you have enjoyed this video, if you like the channel, please subscribe. I am Braggy. I am a Viking reenactor. I am a storyteller, and we like to have fun on this channel. We like to entertain and educate at the same time. So it's goodbye from me as I go around my sword. And I tell you what, it's not easy walking around a house with a sword, because I've knocked over a load of boxes today and I made a right mess. Goodbye.